Welcome to Under the Wing with Andrew, where stories soar and conversations fly free. I'm your host, Andrew Wingard, inviting you to pull up a chair, kick back, and join me around the campfire for some warm exchanges. Each episode, we dive deep into life's journey with incredible guests from all walks of life, blending wisdom, lessons, and a little bit of laughter along the way. Whether you're here for inspiration, insight, or just a good old chat, you're in the right place. Gather around. Let's begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Under the Wing with Andrew, the podcast where we exchange stories and ideas. I'm your host, Andrew Wingard, and I am thrilled to have you with us today. On today's episode, we have an incredible guest, Harry Psaros. Harry's a devoted family man, husband of 24 years, proud father of 2 sons, an executive neuroscience account specialist for AbbVie, actively involved in his community, board member for the Autism Caring Center, one of the founders of North Fayette PALS. Did I pronounce that right, Harry?
Fayette. Yep.
Fayette.
Our township, right.
North Fayette PALS, an organization dedicated to supporting special needs children. President of North Fayette Township Parks and Recreation Board, and is also has a role as vice president at All Saints Greek Orthodox Church in West Virginia. I said all that to say in a mouthful, Harry's doing a lot of work in his community, including his role with his family and professionally. But the gist of this conversation will be about his book. Harry's the author of From Struggle to Strength, A Father's Journey with Autism and the Power of Hope and Positivity, where he shares his inspiring personal story. And his life motto is simple: if you are breathing air, you should be helping others. I'm pretty excited about this. So without further ado, let's welcome Harry to the show.
It's great to be here. It's a true honor. And I want to say today's a special day because my book is about my son, Gus. And Gus turns 21 today. So my son is legal and dangerous. And but so this is shout out to Gus. Happy birthday to Gus. He, it's an honor to be his father. And I look forward to talking about him.
That's awesome. Happy birthday, Gus. 21 is a big milestone. So that's exciting. And then hopefully he has a special day planned for himself and hanging out with family and friends. And so, Harry, before we dive too much into the book, I had a few thoughts as I was looking at your background and looking over the book details there. You have a lot going on. And I think the first question I asked, being that you're in the Pittsburgh area, what's the deal with the French fries on the South?
So, first of all, I grew up in Weirton, West Virginia, about 30 miles from Pittsburgh, but we consider ourselves Yinzers, Pittsburghers. I mean, we're like a suburb. It all starts with Permane Brothers, but if you go back in the history of Pittsburgh, I mean, we were built on the steel industry, and we had the trains and locomotives that came through, and the dock guys. And so what it all started, Permane's kind of set the standard where, and anyone that comes through for a Steeler game goes to Permane Brothers. They pack everything they can on a sandwich. You want to make sure you're nice and full. And you could basically have a coronary after eating one. I mean, it's loads of meat, loads of French fries. So everyone else kind of adopted it. And I have management that have come through, spend days with me here, and they throw their diets out the window because when you eat in Pittsburgh, you're really eating. So, yeah, it's a Pittsburgh thing. We throw fries on everything. If you're a health nut, which I am, I have to tell them no fries, no cheese, because you're going to get mounds of it. So, yeah, it's a Pittsburgh thing. I love being a Pittsburgher. I'm a Yinzer. I'm a diehard Steeler fan, and I'm a top social media influencer for University of Pittsburgh sports. I went to Pitt, so but yeah, it's in my DNA. But I'm a health nut, so I do avoid the fries.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that because I've seen it and I'm like, all right, I don't get it. And so I appreciate you sharing a little bit about the story and the background in that. All right, let's jump into the topics of discussion here. And again, I want to start with a few questions that I wanted to ask personally. You have an active lifestyle that you just mentioned. You're a former athlete. And one of the things that I've done as a former athlete is I continually reflect on the journey and try to make sense of what everything makes sense of. How do I compare that to life? And so, you have a lot going on, and so what I would like to do is, how do you think martial arts, strength training, running have influenced your mental and emotional resilience as a professional and father?
It's a great question. I've said this to a lot of people. I'm an average athlete. I'm a good fighter. I found I gravitated towards boxing, upper belts in Aikido, third-degree black belt in Tung Sudo. What what it really has taught me is a multitude of things. One is confidence. Two is goal setting. And I write in my book, every black belt is a white belt that just never gave up.
Yeah.
A three is resilience. But I think it's all about, and I applied this to my son, and it's in my book, is about process improvement. I talk about throwing a punch. When you're a white belt, you might just throw your arm out for a punch. And then by the time you're a black belt, you realize that the punch actually starts with your feet, then your hips, then extends to your fist. So you triple the power. And it's taught me to chip away at everything in my profession, in parenting, everything. I can go on and on. I mean, it teaches you reflection, Zen, staying calm, even in the worst cases and scenarios. So if anyone goes to buy my book, From Struggle to Strength, you're going to see gold boxing gloves, and gold is the color for hope. And the reason I threw that analogy out, and I equate it to my martial arts background, when you are in a dojo or in a boxing ring, if you put your guard down, you're going to get hit in the head. I used to fight Muay Thai. You're going to get knocked out in that scenario. I equated it to every day raising a child on the spectrum. You have to be on your A game, and you have to have your guard up, and you have to have goals set to help them. So that's why if anyone looks at my book and says, well, why is there gold boxing gloves? I wanted to bring that warrior mentality in a good way to raising a child on the spectrum. But the martial arts, the beauty of it compared to some other sports, I'll say this, it's a lifelong exploration of learning. It teaches you to enter every day, and everybody should apply this, with a Zen mind, a beginner's mind. You don't know everything. You should be willing to learn. And I've tried to approach that with my sons and explain to them the same thing. Every day is a learning process. You need to be open to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's exactly what I was looking for, especially because you have so many different sports, and I love your analogy of how you tie your boxing realm and your tenacity boxing, keeping your guard up, and how you're using that as a father and a husband and in life. And I just process of improvement like that's huge, and I'll bring that back up a little bit later. But thank you for sharing that because I think that's extremely important, and especially for our young people as they're trying to transition from their athletic background. And I think a lot of questions that I've heard is how do I transition the skills that I've learned for the past 21 years into adulthood? And I think you hit the nail on the head there is how do you do that, but making sense of I can still practice the tenacity of boxing, but just in a different way, not in a negative way, in a positive. So that's
Right.
awesome. You're a busy man, Harry, and your volunteer work, your professional work, managing a household, your husband, a father. How do you continually find energy to serve your family and your community throughout the day?
It's a great question, and I'm involved in a lot. And first of all, let me say this: this starts with my parents were incredible. They're highlighted in my book. My mother's in the Weird West Virginia Hall of Fame for service. My uncle and cousins are both in the Hall of Fame for community service. My brother is a worldwide known philanthropist, both internationally and nationally. I'm going to give him a shout. On Saturday, the country of Greece will be presenting him with a commemorative stamp. He's going to be on a commemorative stamp for all the philanthropic work he's done there, let alone the United States. So it's in our DNA to help others. I think a lot of it is compartmentalizing, and really, I'm very agenda driven with to-do lists. I have a big board. I'm involved in so much that you just need to know what percentage of time is critical for each activity. And I put up a big board every day. I do it actually before I go to bed. So when I wake up, I'm staring at it. If I didn't, I'd be all over the place. Yeah. I'm on several boards of directors locally. Again, with the book is taken off internationally. I'm doing interviews like this. I'm doing articles. And there's so much going on. But anyone that knows me, I'm a over caffeinated type A. So this is how I like to live my life. I'd rather be out and about doing things, constantly busy, than just sitting on the couch. And let me say this, and I say it in my book, and I stress this to my sons. I say in the game of life, you're either sitting on the bench or you're playing in the game, and the people that
Yeah.
play in the game are the MVP. So I'd rather be out and making an impact in my community and others people's lives, and I've been blessed to do that with this book, than sitting on the couch and doing very little.
Yeah. No, that's crucial. That is crucial. You're giving me all kind of gems here for this game of life here, Harry. You're filling it up. You're filling it up. I got to make sure I stay on task, or we'll get sidetracked here.
I'm going to keep on you here in the future.
All right. So last question here before we dive into the book. One of the cool things is seeing you involved with the All Saints Greek Orthodox Church, and you shared a little bit about your family and how that's kind of molded you into the philanthropist and community leader that you are. In what ways do you believe your leadership within the church has influenced your perspective on serving others, both within your family and in your professional life?
It's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. I'm Greek Orthodox. I know this is going to be on the radio, but obviously here's my cross. It's around my neck, and I'm quiet about my faith. I'm not the type that spouts it, although I talk a little bit about it in the book. But I believe that your faith teaches you that you are to be kind to everyone. It teaches you empathy. And I needed that in my journey with my son. And I will tell you, it's especially if you read the first chapter, the longest chapter, that's Gus's story. We had a lot of heartbreak, a lot of ups and downs. And I would often go back and rely on my faith. And I reminded myself one thing about my son: God doesn't make a mistake. And I'm going to repeat that. God doesn't make a mistake. So my son, who's incredible, was given to me. And I changed my mindset from, oh my God, what do we do? He has autism, to what an honor God has given me. He saw enough faith in myself and my wife to challenge us to raise this incredible young man. And what he's taught us is 10 times more than we'll ever have taught him. So like I said, I leaned on my faith a lot, but it's also taught me to be patient and taught me empathy and to love others. And I apply that with my sons.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so I think I want to stay there for a second. You talked about how it teaches empathy, and we're going to start shifting here to a little bit about your book from struggle to strength. Why was empathy so important during this process as you're working with your sons and your family and your wife? Why that word just sticks out to me?
Empathy was important, Andrew, and anyone that has a child on the spectrum, these children in general, whether they're mild all the way to severe, have challenges. No day is exceptionally easy for them. And what it taught me is to sit back, take a step back, and put myself in my son's shoes. Yeah. And you had issues with socialization. You had sensory issues. So, Andrew, what you and I might take for granted going into a loud room is very catastrophic for a child on the spectrum. So it taught me at all times, if they were struggling, not to yell at them or go, hey, you need to do this, but to step back and go, what if I was in his shoes? What would I be going through? And sympathize with them and work on a little bit of improvement, as opposed to just go, you need to do this or you need to do that. So, it really taught me to put myself in his shoes, and you have to have it if you're raising a child, any special needs child in general, because I helped one of the founding families for PALS here in the area. And, there's children with Downs, hearing impairment, sight impairment. You have to have empathy and realize what that child is going through in order to properly nurture them and raise them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's powerful. And so I'm going to lead into this next question. You've kind of hit a little bit about this based off of just me hearing how you speak about it. From struggle to strength, what was the inspiration behind writing it?
A great question. So, in 2014 in Pittsburgh, we had the Autism Notebook.
Mm-hmm.
And that was founded by Kelly Kane, who now is the founder of the Autism Caring Center. But the notebook had a big convention here, and there were a large number of people. I was one of the first fathers ever to ask to speak. And I stood up, and you can imagine this. I stood up to speak, and about 10 minutes into the speech, I start watching mothers line up. 10, and there might have been 10 to 12. And they all looked very emotional. And my first thought was, God, did I say something offensive? I was kind of confused. But when I finished my speech, all of them walked up, physically grabbed me and said, Harry, we need your help. Our husbands on our board. We need you to speak with them. So that led to a multitude of coffees, conversations, dinners. A few hung up on me, truthfully. But I was able to kind of get a feel more of the male psyche. And some were on board, were just stoic. Some were just a bit belligerent, and I had to get through to them. But when I finished, I looked at my wife. I said, I think there's a book here, because this is an issue. Because, Andrew, if you aren't on board with your spouse, that child drifts into the oblivion, or the abyss, I call it. You don't want that. So a few years ago, I gave one of the keynote speeches at the Autism Caring Center here in Pittsburgh, their Mother's Day conference, about 400 mothers in attendance. And I had the same reaction. I was lucky enough to get the notice of Corey Walmsley, that owns Aurora Coriolis Publishing. And she came up and said, your voice needs heard. And I said, ironically, the speech that I delivered, I felt was my book on steroids when I write it. But I said, it seemed to me that there needed to be a male voice out there, and there needed to be a voice that would get through to fathers unwilling to accept the autism diagnosis. So this book, there's a multitude of things it touches on, but one is getting through to those fathers. And then two, it's a motivational book for anyone that has a child on the spectrum. I am all about positivity and hope. It's on the cover of my book, and that's what I try to give them by the end of the book.
Yeah. So as you've been kind of going through this journey with fathers, why do you think the men and the fathers are struggling? And do you think they're struggling more than the mothers?
Of course.
Why do you think that is?
Males, it's in our DNA, want to fix things. So fixing off obviously, with the male perspective, is sometimes very quick. So if your child falls off a tricycle or falls off their bike, you just put a Band-Aid on their knee, right? With autism, you can't do that. You can't, quote unquote, fix it. So there's a multitude of things that are going on. Some are literally immersed in stoicism. They're sitting there trying to figure it out, and their stoicism is seen as them being uncompliant. Others, there is a machismo involved. They can't fathom that their DNA produced a child that might have special needs. They can't get past that. And I've had to break that facade with many of them. And, it's a multitude of issues. Like I said, it's a range, but in most of the scenarios, not all, but most, it's the men that struggle to come on board. And I was one of them initially. I mean, I'm a lunatic type A. I state in my book, I'm the type of guy that can have fun at an insurance seminar. So it was hard for me to believe that my child would have an issue that would be to have an impairment socially and other things like that. But once we got the diagnosis, I had a complete paradigm shift in thinking, and apologized to my wife, who I was owed one. She was owed one, and got on board, and we start progressing forward and trying to help our son as much as possible.
Wow. No, that's powerful. Is that journey, and so hopefully, some of the men, and I hear a little bit of that, and I'm thinking of when that may have transpired in my life, and so it's a great thought point. And I think I might have to digest that a little bit more. Maybe there is something there that I need to take a little bit further. So thank you for sharing. And so as we look at the journey, tell me about a pivotal moment that transformed your approach to fatherhood after your son was diagnosed with autism.
It's a great question, and we talked about the empathy piece, and one of the most crushing experiences I had early on with him was he was very close in a neighborhood with a group of boys, and at school too. The one oddity with my son, although he's on the spectrum, he wants to be with people. He's inevitably social.
Mm.
But the one friend in his group, and there were like about 8 of them that would kind of all hang out, had a birthday party, and the mother had omitted Gus, and
Mm.
she knew he was on the spectrum and was also worried about food allergies. So her thought was, let's not invite him because we don't know if we get him sick or what might happen, and it crushed him. And I think there was a lot of confusion at the time because he was on the spectrum of how to handle him. And I sat in the front of our house, and he leaned in on me, sobbing. And it was such a humbling experience because you never want to see your child in that deep a state of depression,
Yeah.
and I realized that I felt so badly for him, and B, that as his father, I need to advocate a bit more and explain that he could have easily been at that party. A pretzel's not going to do him in. If he would
Right.
have taken the gluten, and it was really a pivotal and crushing moment where I said I needed to speak out a little bit more and explain to people that he doesn't bite. He's just like any other kid, and it's not a stigma, or anything like that. It's not the scarlet letter. You should avoid him. And I did a lot more of that. And the other
Mm.
piece I will throw out, Andrew, is my son can't hear out his right ear. And he has Tourette's, and he has what's called PCD, primary ciliary dyskinesia. When I say Gus is a fighter, he's gone through a lot of different things, and I write about it in my book. But when we found out he couldn't hear out his right ear, which does again affect him socially, you actually hear quicker out your right ear than your left.
Oh wow.
And I just remember it crushed me. And I went up to give him the dad lecture, and he looked at me and went, "Dad, what are you worried about? I could hear you right now." He started kind of getting on me. He goes, "Yeah, I have one ear that works. Don't worry about it." And his positivity in that moment taught me another lesson. This kid is
Mm.
tough. This kid is going to be resilient. And I'm proud to say, I mean, he's in college and doing well. And like I said, maybe in a week or so, we'll be buying him his first legal beer. So,
Yeah.
but I'm so proud of him. But those moments to me stand out. From the depression at one point and having to advocate for him to his positivity in the worst of situations.
Wow. You mentioned positivity, the positivity that he exudes to you guys, the family, the community. In regards to you and maybe your family, how did you maintain that mindset through challenging times? Gus is giving it out, but how did you kind of develop and cultivate that positive mindset?
When we started the initial grind with therapy, and any parent of a child on the spectrum might be listening to this can understand this. We had therapists in the morning. We had their supervisors coming at lunch. My wife was a hero. She had to quit her job. It was a full-time job. And you're watching the grind. My parents have taught us to be infinitely positive, my brother and I. We don't do negative. And don't get me wrong, you have your bad days. I'm human.
Yeah.
But what had occurred to me, and I talk about this in my book, your children waking up on the spectrum have a job in front of them. They have therapy. They have sensory issues. They're trying to find their way in the world. They're trying to socialize. It doesn't come easy. They have a difficult task, difficult path in life. The
Mm-hmm.
last thing they need is negativity. They don't need your negativity. So what I touch upon, because the show hit upon it, was the Ted Lasso effect. If anybody's watched the show Ted Lasso, and I talk about waking up every day, and it has to start with the parents. You have to permeate positivity, permeate optimism, so the child can feed off that, and they'll thrive and do much better. And that's why I touch upon it. I just think it's so important. It's such a grind for these young men and women, these children, that the last thing they need is a caustic, toxic environment where the parent is being negative.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. So I wanted to create that mindset. And by the end of the book, if mine's an easy read, Andrew, it's under 150 pages for a reason. I want it to be
Nice.
a nice, easy read, but it's a pick me up for any parent with a child. But I wanted to set that stage and go, when you're waking up every day, on top of the 2% rule, I'm sure we'll talk about, I want them to understand that they need to set that tone for the day, and it has to come with positivity and hope.
Yeah. Let's go into that because you mentioned prior to us, preparing for this, and I think it's a good segue. Let's touch on the 2% rule that you shared in the book. And again, I had that a little bit later, but since you mentioned it, let's talk about
Yeah, absolutely. The chapter in my book is called "The 2% Rule: The Mind of a Black Belt." When you were in the martial arts, and you asked me about my martial arts background earlier,
it. Yep.
everything you're learning, a block, a kick, a punch, everything, your attempt, your approach is to get a bit better every class. Think of Atomic Habits, right? So
Yep.
my 2% rule and the way it applies to a child on the spectrum is like Atomic Habits on steroids. You want to wake up every single day and go, how can I get my child 2% better at something? Whether it's socializing, trying a new food, activities of daily living. But I would always try to set a goal and go, what can I do today to make Gus 2% better? I would observe him with interactions with other kids, with adults. I would watch him if he was brushing his teeth, whatever it might be. A lot of these children have what's called the beige diet. They eat nothing but chicken nuggets and fries. You mentioned fries earlier. In Pittsburgh, they're happy, but all that, and I wanted to, we went through feeding therapy. And so, hey, maybe I can introduce a new piece of food today, a new vegetable that's unique to him. So
Mm,
every day waking up, not just positive, but setting that goal of how can I get 2% better, knowing that those 2% gains collectively are going to lead to something bigger down the line. That's very,
mm,
very important. And Andrew, I'll add to that another concept from the book. Any parent that has a child on the spectrum, you have to have sight and you have to have vision. I want to repeat that. Sight and vision, they're two separate things. Sight is the day to day grind. That is the 2% rule. What are we doing today to make my child better
mm,
every day? Vision is where's my child going to be 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line? And vision can change. I talk about it in my book. Gus went through neuroplasticity training, essentially at brain balance. If we didn't do that early in high school, I don't know if Gus would be a college student right now. So
wow.
middle school, early high school, our vision, and think about a vision board, was maybe he's going to end up at a trade school after brain balance and the rewiring of his brain. And he started to excel in school. He said, you know what? We think we have a college student. So again, to encapsulate everything, you have sight and you have vision. Sight is the now. What are we going to do today? The 2% rule. And you have to have vision. And I think having a vision board with your child is very, very important.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. And so we're getting winding down here to the last few minutes, and I have a few more questions I want you to touch on here, especially from your view of working with families navigating autism. In your view, are there any societal changes that are needed to better support families navigating through this journey?
Oh, societal. That's a broad question. And Andrew, let me say this: if we're talking about society, what I would like to see. I talk about the word empathy.
Yeah.
It all starts at home,
Mm,
and unfortunately, a lot of these children at times can be bullied. And
mm,
if you see a bully, you could point the finger directly at their parents. It all starts at home. What are you teaching your child?
yeah.
And I think the stronger parent teaches empathy. And if you have a type A dominant child, they should be protecting the weak, not attacking them. So if I had a societal change I'd like to see is I'd like to see a bit more empathy taught at home and understanding that not everybody is neurotypical. There's a diversity of different people out there in general. So that's what I'd like to see, and I'm hoping we see more of it here in the future.
Yeah. And as we talked about the fathers and the man today, and the big reason of you writing this book was to connect with them. And hopefully someone's going to listen to this message and say, all right, I need to go look into this book. And so, what message would you want to leave with fathers who are just starting this journey with their children and unsure where to begin?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, the book lays out basic steps, and that is, but it all starts with them. If honestly, it all starts with your mental approach. And, I would say to all the fathers two things. One, immediately get on the same page with your spouse. Immediately. When you are both in unison and you're working for a collective goal, that's when things happen. Two is just remember something. Just because your child's on the spectrum, they're your child. They don't have a scarlet letter. They're not broken. Appreciate what God has given you, and then just set a plan on a daily basis to help them improve. The third thing I would say is definitely build your village. Find people that are going through the same experience. There has to be organizations or groups in your area. Educate your family, educate your friends. You need a support system. You can't go it alone. And let me add this: if there is no organization in your area, create one. 1 in 36 children right now. I talked about making an impact in life, right? There's 1 in 36 children in your area are being diagnosed. Trust me when I say this. No matter where you're at in the country or overseas, there's someone in your area with a child on the spectrum. Do that, but just understand that you are leading the pack. And not to be sexist, I'm just saying, as a husband, set that tone of positivity, hope, and your child will feed off your direction, and just work with them, help them improve on a daily basis, and good things will happen.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so Harry, first off, thank you for sharing all of this. I've taken something from it, even from the side of not having a child with autism, but there are some key points in here. And you just mentioned it, a support system. And I can't, I'm thinking about the support system that I've had, and I think I believe in you're on many boards, and I try to tell our young people to create your own board of trustees and surround yourself with people who are going to be able to support you in your times when you have questions. And so I think that's so important. And so, how can listeners learn more about Harry and in your book, From Struggle to Strength?
Sure. First of all, if you go to harrypsaros.com, so Harry, Psaros.com, From Struggle to Strength, The Father's Journey with Autism and the Power of Hope and Positivity is available on Amazon and Kindle. And for those that like Audible, like I do, to be quite honest, I am finishing up my Audible book this week. I'm excited to say I'm finishing the recording, and it will be available on Audible as well. And Andrew, I want to, I'm not going to lie. My goal is to become one of the more preeminent fathers in the nation speaking about this topic. I have some other books in mind. So this will be the first, but I have a few more in mind. I want to be a beacon of hope out there for not just fathers, but for parents in general with newly diagnosed children. So I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate the fact that you're helping me with the message right now.
Absolutely, Harry. I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Again, I read that huge list of what all you're doing, not just for your family, but for other families working through this journey and through your community. And so I thank you for taking a little bit of time to chat with me and share a little bit about your story and share it with the listeners here in hopes that someone else can, take that in value. And so thank you for being a value in your community and to your family. And we appreciate it. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
I am so glad you could join us for another episode of Under the Wing. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. I hope you found some value or joy in this episode. If you did, share the love by passing this episode along to a friend. And hey, if you know someone who would make a great guest, send their name my way. Until next time, friends, keep flying high and spreading love wherever you go. See you soon.